Hello and welcome to this course. In the next few hours, I'm going to show you exactly how you can implement Google Analytics on your Shopify website in a way that provides you with valuable data. I really do believe this is the most comprehensive and detailed Google Analytics and Shopify integration course ever created, and I'm incredibly excited to share it with you. When used correctly, this information will allow you to increase your income by significant amounts, all by optimizing your marketing and your website flow. So by the end of this course, you'll be able to track which of your marketing channels is working and converting, and which are the ones you need to do more work on. You'll understand which of your content visitors are engaged with, and most of all, how you should improve that content and which content you should be creating more of. You'll be able to identify which products are performing poorly and how to turn them around. You'll also discover where people are abandoning your sales funnel and your forms. Now, please do complete each lesson in order. Each builds on the previous one, and if you skip one, you may miss an important detail which will prevent your data being tracked accurately. So, without further ado, I present to you the complete guide on implementing Google Analytics on the Shopify platform and how to use that data to make more money. Enjoy. In this tutorial, you are going to learn how to perform an advanced Google Analytics implementation for an e-commerce website using Google Tag Manager. And that includes everything like setting up custom dimensions, custom metrics, goals, filters, and even a user ID view. And by the end of this implementation will probably be way more sophisticated than you would get if you just went to a standard digital marketing agency to get it done. Secondly, we're going to build a data layer for data accuracy and future-proofing, and we're going to implement that on Shopify. You're also going to track key on-page events for website optimization, such as page reading time, scroll tracking, form submissions, form abandonment, email, and outbound link clicks. And finally, because this is an e-commerce site, we're going to implement the whole of enhanced e-commerce, not only to track revenue and what products have been purchased, but all the way back up the transaction funnel. So we're going to measure when someone sees a product, when someone adds it to their cart, removes it from their cart, when it is seen within a list, and when it is clicked within a list as well. Step number one is we're going to create a Google Tag Manager container and add it to our Shopify website. Number two, we're going to create and configure a Google Analytics account, property, and all the views we need. Step number three, we're going to implement a basic data layer on the Shopify site. Step number four, we're then going to go back to the GTM container and set up all the tags, triggers, and variables we need. We're then going to implement enhanced e-commerce, so we get all the transaction tracking and everything like that. And finally, as we go through the process, we'll be debugging, and I'll show you some ways that you can find the data in GA to use it to optimize your website. This is a typical e-commerce site. We've got the homepage, we've got a catalog page where we can go into specific categories, and on those category pages we have product listings. Now my shop's only got 2 products, but both of these are available for purchase. We can go to the product details page, see what it's about, add it to the cart, and once we've added it to the cart, we can change stuff, we can remove it, and we can go through the checkout process just as you would in a normal e-commerce site. We've also got a blog which has articles. We've got a contact page, and that's about it. Now this website is built on Shopify. I'm using Shopify just because it was quick for me to set up, and I've had a few questions about people wanting to install enhanced e-commerce on this platform. Now obviously there are lots of different platforms out there and I can't cover them all, but I'm hoping the concepts and the majority of what I go through here about setting up enhanced e-commerce, setting up Google Analytics will resonate with you, and you'll be able to take those principles away and apply them to other platforms, such as, for example, Magento. Within the Shopify system, there is the opportunity to paste your own Google Analytics code right in here under Preferences. Now, I did this and it didn't track everything that I wanted it to. I found it a little bit inflexible. There were certain things in the enhanced e-commerce implementation which weren't all there, such as tracking product impressions. And I also want to have a lot more flexibility over my implementation than just rely on how Shopify have set it up. So I'm going to choose to implement Google Tag Manager and then do all my implementation through that, rather than using Shopify's own built-in Google Analytics implementation. So I would encourage you, whenever you see the ability to integrate Google Analytics with your e-commerce site, first check what they track and how they track it. It might be worth running a little test to see what kind of data they're collecting, and then you can decide whether you want to use that or to create your own. In this section of the course, you'll learn how to implement Google Tag Manager on your Shopify website and how to configure Google Analytics in a professional way so that it starts to collect accurate data once the implementation is completed. We'll cover basic topics such as setting up GA property, creating views and view filters, and also more advanced topics such as creating custom metrics and dimensions. Once you've completed this section, you'll be all set to start the implementation process. So on we go. We're now going to install and set up our Google Tag Manager account and container. If you don't already have an account, head to tagmanager.google.com, create an account, and then that will give you a container to work with. If you have an account but don't, you've already got containers in your account, as I do, I'm going to come and create a new container like this. And this is going to be call it Shopify Demo. And this is a website, obviously. So let's create that. That will create a new container within our account and give us some code. Now, obviously, this code, again, we need to somehow deploy onto the Shopify website on every single page. So that's what we're going to do next. Head over to the Shopify admin, and under Online Store Themes, you're going to go down to Edit HTML. Now within there, you're going to create a new snippet. So add new snippet, and you're going to call this GTM container.liquid. Liquid is the file extension of Shopify, and it refers to basically liquid syntax, which is a syntax for writing HTML pages. So we've now got the liquid file, and within that, we need to paste in our Google Tag Manager code. So we're going to just take the top one, and it says paste this code as high in the head of the page as possible. So let's do that. We're going to paste it into our liquid container. So let's save that. And now this is just an external file, so we need to include this external file in our main theme file. So this is the theme, this is the wrapper for the entire website. So I'm just going to look for the head tag, and just before there, I'm going to use liquid syntax, and I'm going to include GTM container, just like that. So essentially what that's doing is it's looking for the file that I created, GTM container.liquid, and pulling in the contents and basically injecting it right at that page. So let's have a look. Let's save this. Let's preview the website. And if we have a look at the source code here, search for GTM, we can see that now our GTM code is now installed on the website. If we want to test that, just to make triply sure that everything is as it seems, let's go back to Google Tag Manager, close this for a moment, and I'm going to submit this. So I'm going to publish this container, so we get version 1 of the container. And I'm also going to preview it here. So let's preview. Now what preview mode does is it basically, just for your computer, sets a cookie so that when you go onto the website you're testing and you refresh it, you'll get a new window at the bottom which shows the Google Tag Manager debugger. And the very fact that it has appeared and turned up tells me that Google Tag Manager is installed correctly. Let's set up a Google Analytics account, since that's where all the data is going to be coming into. So first of all, I'm going to place my shop within my account, Metric Mogul, and I'm just going to create a new property for it by going down to create new property. And it's going to be a website, and I'm going to call it Shopify Demo. And we've got the URL there. Make sure your time zone is correct. This is important because Google Analytics uses this to determine when a session is going to be cut off. And let's put in, I'm just going to select a random one here. Okay, so this gives us a tracking ID. And what we would normally do is we would normally copy and paste that code and paste it, as I said, straight into here, like so. But as again, I've reiterated, I don't want to do that because I want a bit more flexibility over my implementation. So we're going to go a bit customized here. All right, so I've got my basic account. Let's have a look at the views. We've created one view here. We get this by default, but Google recommends you have a couple of views. So I'm going to rename this one. This one is going to be called main. And I'm going to change this to pounds because that's my default currency. Make sure bot filtering is on, and I'm going to turn on site search tracking. How do you know what query parameters to put in here? Well, very simply, you go to your website and you do a quick search. So let's have a quick search. And then you look up in here in your URL, and you want to make sure you can see the query parameter here. The keyword we typed. So Q is our search query parameter. So back in Analytics, I just have to put Q into this box here, and I want them stripped off like that. So now that sets up internal search tracking within Google Analytics. Okay, what else do we need to do? Well, I'm going to copy this view, and I'm going to create one called raw. And the reason for that is because we're going to add filters to the main view, and filters will throw away some of our data and we won't be able to get it back. So raw is going to be a raw profile with no filters, just in case anything goes wrong. Now, in the main one, we want to exclude spam traffic. There's a lot of problem with people spamming websites nowadays. So I'm going to create a filter, and I'm going to make it a custom one. I'm going to include traffic to the host name, my Shopify.com, which is the domain I am looking for. Now, this is a regular expression, so I need to put a backslash before the dot. Okay, we'll save that. So now we've eliminated most spam traffic that will be coming to the website, and we won't get it included. I would also want to exclude, if I was doing this for a live site, I want to exclude office IP address. So this is an exclude traffic from the IP address that's equal to, and you would put in your office IP address in here. I don't want to actually exclude anything, so I'm just going to make one up. This is not my real IP address, but for the purposes of demonstrating this technique, obviously it doesn't like that. But in reality, you would put a real IP address in there. Let's see if we can make one up here. There we go. So those are the two main filters that I set up whenever I'm creating a website. Those are probably two of the most important ones. Next up, we want to enable e-commerce because this is an e-commerce site. So first of all, we're going to enable e-commerce. And we also want enhanced e-commerce turned on. All right, so there we go. Now, if we were using a traditional e-commerce platform, we would also want to track the checkout steps. So step one might be shipping, or might be create account. Step two might be shipping. Step three would be billing. And then we don't need to include the cart, and we don't need to include the transaction because that is already captured. Now, the problem with Shopify is that Shopify doesn't let us put tracking code onto the checkout steps. It only lets you do that if you pay for Shopify Enterprise. I don't have Shopify Enterprise, so we're not going to be able to do this part of the enhanced e-commerce setup.
If you want to do that, then you have to pay for the full version of Shopify, but you would be able to implement this. So I'm not going to do that in this tutorial. But the main thing is we have turned on Enhanced E-commerce and turned on the e-commerce reports, because we will be needing those. Next up, within our property, we want to enable some custom dimensions and a custom metric. So I think it's important to, if you're not that familiar with Google Analytics, you may not quite know what a custom dimension is. A custom dimension is basically a bit of information that you want to track along with a page view or along with an event. So the example I always use is if you're selling a car online. If someone looks at that car, yes, you will know the page URL of the car, but maybe you want to segment by everyone who looked at a red car or everyone who looked at a BMW. How would you do that? Well, you could export all the page URLs that were viewed and hope that the color and the make of the car are in that URL, and then split up the URL in Excel and do all that manipulation. But that takes a long time. Custom dimensions allow us to set a dimension called color, for example. And then every time a product was purchased or viewed, we could set the color along with that page view or that event to be red, white, black, whatever. And then within our reports, we can break the reports down by color. Similarly, you might want to know, and as I do in the case of my website, I want to know which author of a page is the most popular, which author is bringing the most people to my website. Now again, I could just export all the page URLs and then ask around within my company, who wrote this, but I'd much rather it be quicker and simpler than that. So author would be a custom dimension. There's also two other custom dimensions that I want to track. The first is user ID. People are going to be logging into my website, and so potentially I need to be able to merge my clickstream data within analytics with my CRM data to do clever stuff like personalization. So I'm going to need to have a unique key which is common across both systems, and that is going to be my user ID. And the third custom dimension we're going to track in this case is going to be client ID. Client ID is the ID of the cookie which Google Analytics sets. Now that client ID is pretty much hidden in Google Analytics. You can't expose it that easily. So sometimes it is useful to pick that up and track within your own system, just in case you may need it in the future. So let's go ahead now and create those three dimensions. So the first one, as I said, is going to be user ID. I'm going to set this to session scope because I want it to be applied to the user's whole session. You might argue that it should be a user-based scope. I don't like the user-based scope because I've had situations with clients in the past who have been, for example, signing people up at a booth within a marketing stand at a trade show. And because they did that, basically the whole day, maybe they registered 100 people, Google Analytics would only remember the last user ID and set that user ID for all the previous people because the scoped user ID was set to user. And that may even happen with a session, but I think session is a bit more useful. And we could even set it to be a hit, but for the moment I'm going to keep it a session. If you want to look up more about scopes, then I recommend the Google documentation. So for the moment, let's keep it as session. So this gives me a custom dimension, and you can see it's got a slot of 1. We're going to remember that. We're going to need it in a bit. Next up, let's create one for the client ID. This is going to be a hit. I'm going to leave that as hit because I'm going to be sending on every page view. And the final one, as I mentioned, will be author. And sorry, that's going to be hit as well. So again, this is why I always encourage you, before you start an implementation, to do some research, understand what you're trying to measure and why you're trying to measure it, because that will help you work out what your custom dimension should be. If you don't know that, there's no point in blindly following what I'm doing here because it may not be applicable to your website. So make sure you know what you're tracking. If you're doing A/B testing, for example, you would need a custom dimension for test name, for example. So there's all sorts of things, but it totally varies. You've got up to 20 of these to play with in the free version of GA. So use them wisely and make sure you know why you're tracking that bit of data. Something else we need to do once we've created the custom dimensions is create custom metrics. Now, when we do the implementation, as you see, we're going to create something called attention time, which is going to measure how long people spend viewing a page. And in order to do that, we need to track that as a new metric within Google Analytics. GA has a time on page metric and a session duration metric, but they are not that accurate because they don't take into account people who are not actually on the page but have the browser tab backgrounded, or who have simply left the page open and gone for a coffee break. So we're going to implement attention time in a way that will take account for that and only measure and increase the time if someone is actually on the page. So to do that, as I said, we're going to need a custom metric to store that data in. So give it a name of attention time. This is going to be a hit scoped, and the format type is going to be time. You can leave the minimum and maximum values empty. Okay, so note we've got now an index slot of 1. Head back to your view, and in your view we're going to go to calculated metrics, because attention time is just going to count up the total amount of attention, but we want to know some more interesting metrics, such as how long do people spend viewing each particular page on average. So we need to create a new calculated metric, and this is going to be average attention time. And again, this is going to be a time. And all we're going to do is take the attention time metric we just created and divide it by the number of page views to give us the average page attention. We're also going to create one called average session duration, or average session attention rather. And again, this is going to be a time format. And here we're going to do same thing, attention time divided by the number of sessions. There we go. Now I've got our two metrics. I'm going to change this to be average page attention time. And just for consistency, I'm going to get rid of that time at the end so that both of them look neat in our reports. If you have AdWords account, then you would want to go in here and link your AdWords. I'm not going to be sending any data to this, but as an example, I want to link this account and I'm going to send the data into my main view, which I created. Remember, I created two, one for main and one for raw. I only want the data to go into the main view. Okay, and then I would click link accounts, but as I said, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to advertise to this website. And the other thing you need to do is within the to link Google Search Console. Now, Google Search Console will give us information about whether people are finding this, basically where we rank within the Google's organic natural search listings, and whether we're doing better over time or worse. For that to work, you've obviously got to have a Google Search Console already, but once you have that, you would click here, and just in a few clicks, you can link the two together.
In this section, you'll learn what a data layer is, why we need it, and how to implement it on your Shopify website. First up, let's talk about what a data layer actually is. Don't let the technical name scare you. It's really just a simple JavaScript variable which is hidden within the HTML of every page, and it holds important information about that page or the user, such as page type, user ID, or email. Now, the data layer is necessary because we may want to use that information within marketing pixels. For example, on the sales confirmation page, we need to send order revenue to Google Analytics. By having this value in the data layer, we have easy access to it. In the rest of this course, you'll be adding code to your Shopify theme in order to create and populate the data layer with values that you'll need later on. Simply follow along, and by the end of the course, you'll have a rock-solid data layer implementation and understand its benefits. So, let's get started building the basic bare bones of your data layer.
The next step for us is to build our data layer. Now, this data layer is going to send information from Shopify to Google Tag Manager so that we can execute tags and send particular information about the page we're on or the customer to our analytics systems. In order to do this, there's a couple of things you need to know about Shopify and how liquid syntax works. So the first thing you need to know is that anything between a double curly brace is a value. Now this value will get replaced at runtime by whatever the value is at the time. And this all happens server-side, so that when the HTML code gets delivered to the user's browser, that value will have been replaced. The other thing you need to know is about conditional statements, which are shown like this. So I can do if customer, like so. And this if statement is basically going to say, whenever the customer object exists and is not null, execute whatever is within here. So how do we use these to create a data layer? Well, let's define a user object, first of all. And that object is just going to be empty if the customer doesn't exist. But if they do, we want to start populating it with information. So user equals, and we're going to do user ID equals customer.id, and email, customer.email. Now I can't send email to Google Analytics for privacy reasons, but we can send it to Google Tag Manager because Google Tag Manager doesn't record any information, so that is not breaking any privacy laws. So let's save this and see what the output looks like. So I'm going to preview this on the site rather. Okay, so here we go. Let's open up the page source, and we can now see there is our code, and you can see that the values have been replaced with the correct values. So we now got the correct user ID and the correct email. So anyone who logs in, all our customers, these will vary depending for our customers, and we can now pick this information up in Google Tag Manager. Well, there's actually one more step we need to do before we can get to Google Tag Manager, but I'm going to do that right now. So Google Tag Manager uses this value called the data layer. So let's create that, and that's an empty array for the time being. We're going to move this below down here, and we're going to create this object as the first element in the data layer, and the user is going to be user. We're also going to create a page object. I think it's useful to have a page object. I like to kind of follow the Qubits universal variable specifications. So they require a type variable, and this is going to be set to page.type, I believe it is. Sorry, it's not page type, it is template. That is the value. And we're going to create something called title as well. It's going to be page title, like so. So let's have a look at this and see what this looks like now. Preview this. Have a look at the source code. And we can see now we've got the user object, which is being set in the data layer. We've got the page, type, and title. Now the type is blank, so I've probably made a mistake within my type object. So we need to fix that. So let's go back to the code. And you can see I've made a spelling mistake, so rename that to template as it should be. Preview once again. Again, always check as you go along. It's very important, otherwise things will break. And now we can see we're on the index page. Now I think this is one of the most useful variables to know the kind of page you're on, because you may want to fire different code on different types of pages. For example, if I am on a product page, we may need to collect information about the product, or we may want to deploy some tracking code to fire a particular tag when we look at hampers. And if we didn't have that value in the data layer, it would be pretty difficult to know that we were on a product page without kind of scraping the DOM or looking at the URL structure. But again, that's not very consistent always. Another way we can look at the data layer is through the console window in the developer tools. So you can see here we've got page, we've got the title of the product, and we've got page type product, and we've got a user here as well. So there's a few more things I want to add into the data layer. To save me typing them out, I'm just going to copy and paste them in. So here's one I created earlier. Oops, formatted that badly. There we go. So you can copy this. You can see that I've got user ID, I've got first name, I've got total spend, I've got count of the orders. I've also got the last order. So how much was the last order for and when was it? Again, why is this useful? Because we might want to fire some tags to do some personalization on the site. For example, if someone hasn't bought a product in a while or has bought 100 products, we may want to personalize the banners for them in using Google Tag Manager, or run a particular test for them. Because all this information is in the data layer, we can do specific things and target those specific customers. The next thing we need to do is anything page specific. So there's going to be a customer, basically, if a customer's logged in, they're going to be logged in on every page. And every page of the data layer needs a type and a title element. But particular pages will need other stuff as well. Let's start with the article page. So we're going to do if template equals contains article. Then we need to do some special logic. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to set the data layer element0.page.author to be equal to article.author, like that. I'm not sure why the formatting has gone strange, so let me tidy this up very quickly. So let's go back, put in a semicolon there, and then let's have a look now. There we go. Now we've got the page author within our data layer.